My name is Martin Madert with the Witness to War Foundation, and the following interview is part of the United States Marine Corps Vietnam Tankers Association History Project. The interview is being conducted at the VTA reunion in St. Louis, Missouri on September 24, 2017. Interviewees are members of the VTA. The purpose of this history project and the interviews is to capture the experiences of our Vietnam veterans and make them available for future generations.
Yeah, Joesph D. Balleweg, B-A-L-L-E-W-E-G, United States Marine Corps, 3rd Tank Battalion. I was with Bravo Company. Served the end of 66 through 67.
Terrific. And I guess we'll start off with, how did you get to Vietnam and what were your first impressions when you arrived?
We took a commercial airliner, stewardesses, the whole thing. Landed in Danang. We had 2 fuel stops on the way, but landed in Danang. We were kind of ushered into an area where we would wait for whatever unit was going to pick us up. At the time, didn't even know who I was assigned to. I was a heavy truck driver, was my MOS, 3531, and 3rd Tank Battalion ended up picking me up, and that's who I was assigned to. So started off with H&S Company. We were Hill 34, which is outside Danang. Spent a little time on Hill 55, which we had one of our companies out there. Being a truck driver, we would move around quite a bit. We might be stationed at H&S, but if Alpha Company was out at 55, we may take a load of ammo or, blankets, bullets, Band-Aids, whatever. We delivered it. And you may stay there for a couple of days because you'd convoy out and then you'd convoy back. So we were 2-3 days in all kinds of different places. So it wasn't but about maybe 2 months. And we convoyed to the north. We drove all the way from Danang. H&S Company was dropped off at Phu Bai, and then the rest of us went up and spread out across the DMZ. So I was assigned to Bravo Company. I ended up at Camp Carroll. I believe Alpha Company went to Quai Son. Charlie Company was split between Jiolin, which is on the beach, and Cantien, which is the Hill of Angels. You don't want to be there. That was incoming city. So Camp Carroll was an artillery base. That's where I was. And I ran the motor pool there. I was a Corporal E4. So I was in charge of the motor pool and the truck mechanics. So from there, like I say, we did a lot of delivering up and down, the traversable roads. We went to we were at Quai Son for a few days, then we'd be out at Cantien for a few days, the Rock Pile for a few days. All these places were along what they called the Trace. That was that large expanse of open area, about 3 clicks wide. And just open area in between, and went all the way from Laos to the beach. So that's pretty much where we were and what we did. We took some incoming at Camp Carroll, nothing like they got at Cantien. That was like the pit. We did. I remember one time we got some incoming, and John Grauberg, he was my chief mechanic and my chief thief. We got a bunch of incoming coming in, and so John and I went. We were the only 2 in the motor pool at the time, so he grabbed the coffee pot, and we each took a cup, and we went down and sat in a one-man hole with our legs hanging in the hole. We were sitting on the outside drinking coffee, watching the incoming coming inside the wire. And we sat there for about, I don't know, 30, 35 minutes watching the show. Nothing ever hit close to us, but we enjoyed the show. It was nice. As I recall, we had no casualties. It blew up a bunch of dust. That was about it. And a lot of them were that way, and sometimes they got lucky and hit something important. So
you mentioned John, but tell me about some of the other men that you served with.
Gosh, a lot of the names are gone, but the last guy that was in here was Dave Schollenberger. And Dave and I, we served together. We met coming in. Dave was already there at Hill 34 when I got there. And Dave used to lead the patrols outside. If you're a Marine on the wire, it was your job to patrol outside that wire and put listening posts out or patrols. So Dave at the time was leading patrols. And so, of course, being the new guy, I got stuck going out on patrol in the middle of the night. And a lot of listening post work. 2-man would go out, sit in a little area for ambush, but basically you were there to intelligence. If you heard or saw anything, you were to radio it back, and then you were to stay in place and let the stuff happen. So I remember one night on a listening post outside of somewhere near Dogpatch, which was I forget the name of the town. We called it Dogpatch. And we were on the outskirts of that. And 2-man listening post, and we were sitting there, and all of a sudden we could see some figures approaching down the trail where we'd set claymore mines, and our field of fire was right down the road. And so I was the awake guy at the time, so I forget who the heck was I with. I don't remember who I was with, to be honest with you, but we were just 2 of us. And so we get ready to squeeze those claymores off, and would have taken out, I don't know, probably 15 people that we could see in the dusk coming down that trail. And then I recognized the helmet was an American. So damned if somebody, either our listing post was wrong, which we proved later we were right, but the patrol was in the wrong place. So here comes this it was about 20, 25 guys, went within about the distance of you and I here, about 3-4 feet, and we had to wait for this entire line of Marines to go by, hoping nobody would look down and see 2 armed people and blow us up. And luckily they went by and never saw us. And luckily we didn't blow them up either. So that was kind of a scary night. I mean, you certainly don't want to have any friendly fire. That'd be on your mind forever. So that was about the most exciting thing that happened to me on Hill 34 before we went north. And when we got north, like I said, we were in Bravo Company. Probably the most action I saw was almost the end. Closer to the end of my tour. It was July '67, and they had an operation called Buffalo. And Operation Buffalo, I think it was 1-9 and 2-1 were the combined forces that went from the wire at Contien out into what they called the marketplace, which was an abandoned marketplace. And they got hit, and they got hit real hard. They got 2 companies got overrun. We're hand to hand. I mean, it was the whole thing. Well, I was a truck driver, and I had just gotten into Contien with a load of 90 miller and 90 millimeter ammo for the tanks, and some 50 caliber machine gun ammo. So we were unloading that when all of this hit, and it was going on. So they kind of shut the base down. So I wasn't leaving. So we took the truck and parked it back in the back where it wouldn't be a target, wouldn't be visible. And my A driver and myself, we got out of the truck, and then we were grabbed and formed into a group that was going to go out and assist them. And the reason they were supposed to have a group that was of Marine infantry that was supposed to go out, to help them out if they got in a lot of trouble. But unfortunately, somebody else got in trouble before these guys got in trouble, and that whole group went the other way. So there was nobody to help out 2-1 and 1-9. And so they were forming up a relief column of, we're talking cooks, typewriter guys, truck drivers, whoever they could grab, not to deplete their own wire, but to send out there. So we went out on foot, grabbed our rifles and web gear, and we formed up. When we got out there, it was a mess. I mean, it was bad. There was machine gun fire everywhere, snipers in trees. We were getting artillery, we were getting mortars. So being assigned to tanks, there were 2 tanks out there. So we told our CO, listen, we'll go out and take a squad and we'll protect the tanks because we know tanks. So that's what our assignment was then. So I think we had 7 guys because we were kind of depleted too, So we had about 7 guys to protect that tank. Well, that tank was making runs out into the battle to pick up the wounded. Well, we were picking up the wounded, the dead, all the guns, whatever we could get our hands on, and we'd throw it up on the tank. Of course, that tank's like a bullet magnet. As soon as it gets out there, everything starts shooting at it. So it got pretty hairy out there for a while because we had to stand up, 2 of us, and throw a body up on that tank. And of course, the tank crewmen, they'd be outside now, and they'd grab that body and put it someplace where they knew it wasn't going to fall off. And so we made, I don't know how many runs, but as I recall, there were 85 dead at the end of that battle. And I've never seen 85 dead Marines. I've seen 3 and 4 here, 4 and 5 there. I've never seen 85. And never had to load them. I mean, we were loading body parts. We were loading, the whole thing. So it was, still see that today. And what we would do, of course, once we were loaded, we'd drive back out of the battle and we'd go to a place where a helicopter could get down safely and take the wounded out. The dead, we just stacked them in body bags where the helicopter was, and all the weapons, we had a stack of weapons and gear and whatnot. And we made, I forget how many runs it was, but like I said, we ended up with there was 1 tank got hit with an RPG, so it was kind of disabled. So we made a few more runs with the tank that worked, and then we had to cable the other tank up to drag it out, and because it wasn't drivable. So the first tank pulled the second tank. But like I say, I think they had, I think out of that battle, there were like 37 guys that were uninjured. Everybody else was dead or wounded. And of course, you had a lot of walking wounded. Luckily, they weren't all, half and half. So that was the most ferocious thing I'd ever done over there. But being a truck driver, we get into ambushes quite a bit on the roads, which is not unusual, I guess, but that was the worst battle there was another time we got ambushed between the rock pile and a little village called Kalu. And that was up right where you make the turn to go up to Quezon. And we got ambushed. There were 2 tanks, one in the front and one in the back. And then there were 5 trucks in between. And I was driving one of the trucks. And all of a sudden we get ambushed from both sides of the road. Well, one tank took one side and one tank took the other side. And the Marine infantry we had in the trucks with us all disembarked and took on the enemy. Well, they had a OE-1 Bird Dog. That's a little observation plane. He was flying up above and reporting down to the tanks what was going on. And so he was making circles, and he'd get a little bit wider and a little bit wider and a little bit wider. And now he's out over the top of the hillside off on the North Vietnamese side. And you hear him go, "Oh shit, look at that." And we didn't really know what he had going. So all of a sudden he's talking in code and switching channels. And the next thing we know, it sounds like somebody threw a Volkswagen over the top of the truck. Well, this was 8-inch guns coming out from the ocean, from the sea, off the ships. And they were going over our head. You know, it felt like you could touch them, but they were higher than that. And I mean, everything that they had at Camp Carroll, which was an artillery base, they all turned and started firing in that direction. So it comes to find out they had a battalion of NVA regular right on the other side of that mountain. And if it hadn't been, they were all bivouacked. They were all, tended out and just waiting. So if it hadn't been for that little ambush, which those idiots probably never should have done, we wouldn't have known about this battalion over here, which they just wiped out with artillery. Because they had, from the airplane, they knew exactly where they were. They had coordinates. And we didn't get in on that, but we watched the show. It was tremendous. All the jets in town, they'd stop the artillery, and then the fast movers would come in, the Phantom jets, and it was amazing. It probably lasted hour and a half of them just dropping ordnance over there. Yeah, it was kind of cool. But like I say, we just got in the ambush. We were probably ambushed by maybe 35, 40 NVA regular, and we probably had half that many, but we had the 2 tanks, and we pretty much just destroyed everything down there. So that was typical, but the Operation Buffalo was not typical for a truck driver. But I got to participate in that. So
now, aside from the ambush threat, what was the mine threat and booby trap threat like on the roads?
We'd mine sweep every morning before we went up or down between Camloville, which is the turn-off to go to Contien. They'd mine sweep. We'd take a couple, two tanks, a couple of trucks, command jeep, and they'd mine sweep the entire road all the way down. But, I mean, you can pass by and some little nip can come by and, set something up on the side of the road. You don't know. And sometimes they missed them because a lot of times they would put a plastic explosive versus something metal, and it would detonate. And yeah, I've hit mines a couple times. Pretty well destroys a truck. Tanks can take most of the mine blasts, but not all. I mean, they'll get an unexploded 500-pound bomb, a dud. Well, it's still full of, explosive power, and so they'll bury that next to a charge. Then when the tank rolls over it, they can either command detonate it by hand, or it's got a trip in it where weight will set it off. So, and that can be devastating, something that big. But We raced a truck one day. Matter of fact, that was when I left. The day I got medevaced out, not so much because of my wounds, but because I was 7 days overdue in country. And they didn't want to explain that to anybody. So I was the B driver. I was sitting shotgun, and we were coming down this hill. And coming up the hill was a CB flatbed with a tractor on the back, probably a D8. And we were racing for the little bridge, just to go over like a creek size thing. It was only maybe 20 feet long, but it only takes one vehicle. It can go over it. So the road narrows into one vehicle. And so we were racing that CB to see who could get over that bridge first. And because we didn't want to wait for the other guy. So he beat us there, but the bridge was mined. And it blew that, we were pretty close to it. And we pulled off on the side, and it was a big one. It killed the CB. And I got a load of shrapnel down my back. Nothing serious. I mean, I was considered a walking wounded, There was no ambush after it, so it was just a mine. But we
That was the thing that got you out of Vietnam.
well, I was overdue. I should have been home 7 days ago, so that's what got me out. But I happened to be in that condition. I had a rifle and web gear. I was wearing my military pants that were all, shredded and dirty and, messed up. And I had on a green T-shirt and a helmet, and that was it. And so they medevaced me that way. I turned my rifle and web gear in Danang, and within like 2 hours, I was on an airplane going home with the whole load of walking wounded. The whole airplane was walking wounded. And most of us weren't seriously hurt. We weren't considered Purple Heart. These clean them up, you're fine. And so anyway, we had our 2 gas stops going back, another commercial flight, and we landed in El Toro Marine Base. It's an air base. It's not there anymore. It's down in Orange County, California. Excuse me. So we all check in, and all these guys have their sea bags. Most of them. They'd already been either had their sea bags with them, or I don't know what. My sea bag was in Okinawa, and the only gear that I had, I had a portable radio and stereo type system and stuff like that. I had a nice Thompson submachine gun that I'd picked up on the battlefield. I was going to see if I couldn't get it home somehow, but it was still back up at Camp Carroll. So I basically came home with nothing but this shirt and pants. Everything else was turned in. So they got in my shit right away. Where's your sea bag? I go, Okinawa, And they go, well, where's your uniform? You can't dress like that here. And I go, this is all I got. There is nothing else. So they said, if you'd sign off medical waiver, they'd early out. You'd get early out. So I got about almost 2 full months, I think a month and 27 days early out, because they didn't want to have to get me into uniforms again and reissue me all that gear only to be released from the service. So that was kind of how I left the Marine Corps.
What was it like being back in the States following your service?
Well, there were 2 sides to that. There were a lot of people that didn't like us. A lot of people that were, I guess, afraid of us. So there was a group that hated us. Then there was a group that didn't know what to do with us. And then there was your family and friends. And so I got to see a little bit of all of that. But when I got out of that taxi cab on Westchester Place in Los Angeles, California, they didn't really know I was there coming home. They'd never received word I was coming home. They knew I was overdue by Marine Corps standards, but I got out and my mom was raking the lawn in the front, and the whole street was covered with American flags. Everybody on our block was very pro-military. We had, of the military age kids on my block, and we had a block that was full of kids. There were like probably 18 of us all within 2 years of each other in age. And I think all but 2 of us went to Vietnam, and all of us came home. So it was pretty amazing. So all the families were very pro. And I remember my mom throwing the rake up in the air, and she was really happy, and it was good. All the neighbors came out and cheered you on and shook your hand and wanted to know, everything you just left. I didn't want to tell them anything, and basically I didn't. I went on Los Angeles Police Department when I came home. I was on within 4 months, and once again I was carrying a gun in a hostile environment, working in South Central LA, and so I never had a chance for any of this to settle, or I never thought of it again. So I didn't have PTSD, so I thought. But when I retired, the PTSD set in, and it was pretty bad there for a while. I was getting help from the VA, but the way they handle things is we're not going to fix his problem. We're just going to drug him up to where he doesn't remember anything. So it wasn't good. But finally, I got to the point where I was having like four episodes a night, and I'm talking a night is only like 2 hours long. You're awake the rest of the time. You're afraid to go to sleep. You don't want to go to sleep. You don't want these memories to come back, and they were coming back like 4 times in 2 hours. So I finally got hooked up. My son talked me into going to acupuncture. So I got hooked up that way, and within 2 months of every other week, so within four trips to the acupuncturist, I'd cut PTSD in half, virtually in half. And the longer I did it, and I'm still doing it today, it's instead of having 4 a night, I'm having 2 or 3 a week, and then it went to, 2 times a month, and that's about where it is now. It doesn't rear its ugly head as often as it used to.
That's great.
So and I attribute it to the acupuncture, and going in, I went, acupuncture? Come on, don't give me this crap. What can that do? I did it. It didn't do a lot for the pain, but it certainly cleared up that thought process. It just relaxed you, and it was a good thing.
Well, just one last question to wrap us up today. What do you want future generations to remember about the Vietnam War based on your experiences?
Well, the Vietnam War could have been won by the Americans in probably 3 months' time if they would have just let us fight instead of sitting there and taking the crap. We had no trouble moving north, but we moved north, got to the Ben Hai River, which is the demarcation line, the DMZ, and they wouldn't let us go any further. We kept going, right up to Hanoi. We had no problem doing that. And we were moving well, but they stopped us right there, and there we sat. So, that was the worst part of it. Future generations, they should know we fought well. We all became really close brothers because we all went through an experience that nobody else did, and And just like I don't know what the guys in World War II or Korea went through, because it was a different kind of war. You know, the war that the Marines fought was the Pacific, and the Army pretty much all fought in Europe. Well, this was all jungle. You know, Korea was all frozen wasteland. Well, we fought in the jungle, and it was pretty nasty. Pretty nasty.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your stories with me. It's a real honor and a pleasure, so thank you so much for taking the time, but more importantly, thank you so much for your service, Jeff.
You're welcome. You're welcome, my friend.